Hello and welcome to the Jewelers Academy podcast. My name is Anna Campbell, and today I am excited to be joined by the wonderful Kirsty Maynor. Kirsty is the founder and the CEO of the Firefly Group. She's a certified coach and leadership expert with decades of experience, and she's also the best-selling author of the amazing book you can see behind her there, of Untangled, a practical and inspirational guide to change we choose and change we don't, which is a fantastic book, which you should definitely get, and gives insights and a compassionate approach to embracing life's inevitable changes. So thank you for joining me today, Kirsty. It's exciting to see you.
It is my pleasure to be here.
Yes, and we're going to be talking about change
Mm,
because it's an inevitable part of life. And even the changes that we choose ourselves can be a little bit problematic along the way as well. So
yeah,
I'm really excited to kind of get into this and we'll see if we can help people to navigate through change.
me too. I think even when we were starting to have our chat before we started recording, there were so many parallels in terms of listeners that are jewelers, and whether it's hobby jewelers or whether it's jewelers starting as a business, there's so many things that are relevant in terms of how we live through change. So it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. Well, if we start with, like, what are we talking about when we're talking about change?
So we're talking about change, we're talking about all the different kinds of change in our lives. And it's one of the things that's sometimes surprising to people is actually the skills and the tools and the ways of handling those are all the same, whether they're changes that we're choosing, like, even the first time you ever make a piece of jewelry, that's a change because it's something you've not done before, or whether it's changes life throws at us that, we maybe don't want to have happen, whether that's related to jewelry or just our wider lives. Things happen, and how do we respond to them? How do we grow from them? And how do we live through them in a more fulfilling way is really what it's all about.
Absolutely. Why do we get stuck on change? Like, can you say a little bit more about like what's going on with us?
Yeah, I mean,
That I can keep moving forward.
it's that fascinating thing about human beings because we are designed to evolve and we're designed to keep kind of having changes. We all have the things. Maybe we want to move to a different house, or maybe we, well, want to start a new hobby, or we want to start a business. So we're moving forward and we've got that eye on something different and some kind of new future for ourselves. And at the same time, we're wired for homeostasis. We're wired to keep things the same. So in ourselves, we have these two kind of push pull, and it depends really which one gets to be in the driving seat, whether we feel like, yeah, I can do this, I'm going to do this new thing, or whether we're thinking, actually, no, I just rather hide under a blanket today and pretend I didn't decide to set up a new business, because that feels safer. And it is a lot of the time about a sense of where there's risk and where there's safety. So if we think that it's safe enough for us to test out something, then we're going to go for it. If we feel like actually the risk is too big and maybe people will think we're useless, or, maybe we won't be able to do what we want to do, then actually that's can then hold us back. And you and I were talking about that earlier. It's that sense of wanting to try something new. And somehow when we're in our most creative states, we feel able to test things out, to experiment, to try it out. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. The world's going to keep turning. We'll still get up in the morning, we'll still go to bed at night. It's somehow when our brain convinces us that actually the risk is greater and the consequences are bigger, then we can tend to hold back a bit more. So it's really a mind game, and a powerful one.
Absolutely. And I think we'll get into some of the skills that help us to
Mm,
kind of move through those things in a minute. But I think it would be worth talking a little bit about creativity and change because
mm,
I know from teaching jewelry making myself, some people will go at it and they'll come to a class or a workshop and they'll just be like, "Oh, I'm just going to try this. I'm just going to see if how this works."
mm.
And other people will just be stuck and they'll be like, "Oh, no, I might make a mistake. I might make a mistake," and
Yeah.
like really worry about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting. I think, like you say, well, in my view, this would be quite a small thing that we would
Mm,
be doing. Like you say, it's not a kind of be all and end all of if we make a mistake. But
mm.
like, Why do we get stuck? Why do some people get stuck even on smaller things, do you think?
I think it's because for some people, sometimes those smaller things are not smaller things. So, without getting too scientific about it, we all have, unless you're a sociopath. So, if there are any sociopaths listening, you can skip this next little bit of the podcast, but I think that's probably unlikely. So, we'll assume we've still got everyone listening to us, Anna. Um, Unless we're sociopathology tendencies, then we all have deep seated belief of shame, the feeling of not being good enough. And when we feel that we're not good enough, and you can fill in your own version of that, not clever enough, not creative enough, not artistic enough, not, commercially savvy enough, whatever enough it might be. When we feel like that, we feel like we're not good enough. And if we've grown up believing that by being creative, testing things out, like you talked about, give it a go, see what happens, it doesn't change your fundamental human identity. It doesn't make you not a good human, then we're not likely to have shame about these little kind of experimental creative things. If, on the other hand, we've grown up believing that our identity and our worth are connected with what we create or what we do, and then we're worried it's not going to be good enough, it then becomes a personal thing. So rather than the jewelry, let's take that as an example, sitting on the table and going, well, that's interesting. I've just learned 4 ways not to roll out silver clay to a 7 card depth. Actually, if I then go, wow, I'm really a failure, then that's a much more painful feeling. And as a human, we're designed to try and avoid that feeling. So it depends what we tie to our identity. And if we tie our creativity to our identity, we're going to find it a lot harder to give ourselves permission to experiment.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I
Mm.
think as well, one thing I've seen, which I think is really interesting, is that the idea that we could make a wrong choice. So it's
Mhm.
kind of like we can go in this direction or we can go
Yeah.
in this direction,
Yeah.
and that one of those is right,
Yeah.
those is not right. I kind of like Susan Jeffers, where she talks about the choice point, and she's saying
Yes.
um, we need to remember that actually there are going to be good and bad things about this choice, and there are going to be good
Yeah.
and bad things about this choice. But the problem is when we go down this road, we just presume that means that we've made the wrong one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's that sense of there is a right path and a wrong path, and actually inherently there isn't. As one of my mentors would say, there's more than one way to be right. Or another way of thinking about it is, what's the 2% right in this, or the 5% right in this? Where does this take me? And it's one of the myths of change that I talk about in Untangled, actually, which is that you somehow need to know exactly where you're going before you take the first steps. And really, you don't. What's helpful is to know what your purpose and your overall intention is, and then take the steps that kind of appear in front of you, like let the path reveal itself. And, you and I connected originally through silver clay workshops. And it's easy for me to talk about this now, but when I'm faced with a little piece of silver clay, suddenly everything has to be right. And I am that student that you're just talking about, because we do get kind of frozen a little bit to the spot by sensing that, well, I'm going to mess it up, and then what will happen? And actually, probably the piece of silver clay jewelry that I made that I'm most pleased with is the one that didn't work out, because I cut the box sides the wrong side, and we ended up with that open box that I created, which actually only has 2 sides rather than the top being closed. I would never have planned to create it like that. I had to let go of what I was trying in my head to create and go, oh, okay, well, this is pretty cool. We could work with this and see what happens. And I think that's one of the gifts of, really great teachers and professionals in creative spaces, where they create an environment where you have the permission to try it out and see what happens and discover from it, rather than having a fixed view of, I want to get to here. And that's always going to come unstuck to some extent, especially when you're working with raw materials, heat, water, all these kind of things that get in the way.
Oh yeah, no, that's so true. Yes, I can. I'll dig out a picture of that, and maybe we'll put that on the
Yeah.
website. That's it's so cool. And I think it's right. In some ways, everything is about problem solving, isn't it? It's
Mm,
about like, okay, here we are. This is the situation we're in. Like, what
yeah.
can we do with this?
Yeah.
What's the next thing that we can do? How can we kind of make something great from this?
Exactly. And the same is true with life, and the same is true with business. I mean, I've been running my business for 13 years now. And so many points in that journey. And I've got quite a sizable global team, and so many points I thought I knew what I was trying to do, but then something else will happen. And then do you stick with the original plan rigidly and go, well, no, I was going to do this today, and therefore that's what I'm going to do? Or do you go, oh, okay, how do I move with that? How do I have the self-compassion and the awareness to keep taking those steps? And the courage. I mean, you talked earlier about the change skills, and courage is one of them. It's the willingness to get up in the morning and go, okay, I know roughly where I want to, the direction I want to go in, and I'm going to choose to be brave, and I'm going to choose to face into any fear or uncertainty. And
Yes.
realize that thoughts don't get to determine our reality.
Yes. What I found always is it's the thing you forget sometimes there's the fight and flight, but there's also freeze.
Yes.
And I think often that one gets forgotten, but
Mm,
actually within when we're making decisions and change, sometimes we can just feel like we're stuck and we don't really know. We freeze
yeah.
basically. We don't really
Yeah.
know which way to go, and then we don't make any decision.
Yes, exactly. And I mean that's natural because it's our brain's way of trying to keep us safe, and it's that protection of the homeostasis that I talked about at the beginning. And it doesn't help us if we're trying to create change or if we're responding to change that life has thrown at us. There is sometimes a need for a pause, but a pause that's intentional and chosen is very different than a freezing because your brain's saying, this is too scary, stop right now. And it can sometimes be helpful to just experiment with noticing what are the stories that you're telling yourself, what are the thoughts, and how real are they really true, or are they not? If you don't manage to make a certain amount of money, if you set up the business in the first month, all it means is you don't manage to make that amount of money in that first month. It doesn't actually mean the world is going to come crashing to a halt and fall out of the universe, well, as far as I know anyway. So actually recognizing what's fact and what's fiction, and those pieces where we're tying ourselves to random arbitrary things like money or like a specific piece that we're trying to create, actually not very helpful. Disentangling them is really helpful.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And sometimes if I feel like I'm stuck and I'm not making a decision, I'm not making a decision, I'm not
Oh,
making a decision, because I feel like sometimes, and again, it depends on the person I know, but
yeah.
sometimes the known is even if it's not that great,
Yes.
less
Yes.
scary than an unknown, which can be amazing.
Yeah.
That idea of like, what's the best thing that could happen? Because we get, kind
Yeah.
of sometimes get into that catastrophizing of like, oh, what's going to happen, but in a negative
Yeah.
way. But I think it's just acknowledging that our brain is trying to keep us safe. I think that's that point that
Yeah.
you just made.
Absolutely. And especially when it comes to, things like creating bigger changes in our lives. It's why people stay in jobs that they complain about for so long before they finally do something about it. Because there is an element of perceiving that better the devil you know than the devil you don't. And so I'll just stay here because it may be rubbish, but at least I know it's rubbish. And at least I've got the comfort of, I know it's going to be rubbish. I know it's not going to be great. And that's where having the kind of dual aspects of recognizing the vulnerability that it takes to step into something new, and having the courage, because vulnerability is the greatest measure of courage we have. Anyone who's come across Brené Brown's work, which we draw on heavily in Firefly, I'm accredited in her work, that vulnerability and courage connection in creativity, absolutely, and in life and in business, and really being able to face it rather than run from it. And you'll know because you've read Untangled, I talk about in 2014, every time I recognized I was scared of something, I decided to go towards it. Obviously, not if it was like an actual lion, but if it was, phoning the accountant or making the dentist appointment or whatever else, I just decided I was going to face into it. And I kind of feel like I'm in a similar space at the moment, in that actually just last week I have had the opportunity to go into a cryo chamber where you go into, it's like a freezer, Anna. It's where you
Yeah,
basically walk
yeah.
walk into a freezer. Um And I was paranoid about it. I was absolutely convinced I was going to have a heart attack and die. Uh, but I decided that my thoughts were made up. It wasn't a reality. There was no scientific basis on which that was going to be true. And I was going to not let the thoughts run the show. So on Friday, I went into this cryo chamber for what was meant to be up to 3 minutes. And in my head, I made baby steps, right? One of the things I talk about in Untangled, baby step of, if I go in for 10 seconds, it's still more than I've done, before. I don't have to go for the full 3 minutes. However, I am pleased to say that I did do the full 3 minutes and I have been in again since, and I absolutely loved it. But I'm sharing it because it is an example of where if I had let the thoughts that I was telling myself get in the way, I would never have had that experience. And, whether it's someone deciding that they want to take their jewelry further, whether it's someone, even some, like you say, some of those small choices, like going to experiment with a different material. I saw some fabulous things on your Instagram, the Jewelers Academy Instagram page. I was like, crikey, I want to become a jeweler now. But testing those little changes and proving to yourself that your thoughts are just made up, they're not reality. And actually, when you step forward, then all kinds of amazing things can happen. You just got to keep taking the steps. And as I say repeatedly, crawl if you have to. You don't have to take a giant leap. It could be the tiniest of movements towards where you want to go.
Absolutely. Martha Beck calls it turtle steps, like this tiny little step
Yeah.
forward
Yeah.
is a step forward, and
Hmm.
like you say, and if you can say to yourself, I'll do this for 10 seconds,
Yeah,
you'll do more in
exactly.
10 seconds. I think we
Exactly.
just need to go and ask, what is a cryo chamber for? Let's just, why would you go in one?
Why would you go in a freezer? Well,
Yeah.
I was literally laughing in it on Friday because I have been doing a lot of work around health, thinking about what does healthy mean for me and so I was standing in a freezer on Friday morning laughing, thinking healthy means standing in a freezer for 3 minutes on a Friday morning, which is not something I ever thought I would do. Um, I mean, it's the benefits of cold therapy. So it's good for cardiovascular fitness, it's good for immunotherapy, and for your muscles work harder because you've got more oxygenated blood in them. I'm not a scientist. Please don't quote me on
No, no, no.
any of the above.
Well, so I'm just gonna ask, and I'm like, I don't know why you would do it, so I thought I would ask you that.
But
So,
actually, mental health, to be honest, recap for me, it feels, having done it 3 times now, it feels like a reset. It feels like I actually, over the weekend, even if I tried to get wound up about things, I wasn't able to. It was like my body had kind of recalibrated itself and I wasn't able to get anxious about things. So yeah, not sure about
yeah,
longitudinally, but I'll give it a shot and see.
I love it.
Mm.
Well, I think I was thinking through the book and seeing
Yeah.
like there's so much in there already, so we can't talk about all of it on the
No.
podcast. So that's
No.
absolutely, fine. So if change is something that's coming up for you right now, we'll link to the book and do have a look at that. But
Yeah.
what I wanted to do is just talk a little bit about some of what you called the change skills.
Mm, mm,
And I think they're the kinds of things that it's just maybe some tips or some ideas about developing them. It's not that we're
mm.
just going to automatically be like, hey, boom, this is what, this
Yeah.
is how it is. But understanding, and you've mentioned a couple of them already,
Mm.
but maybe you can say a little bit more about them. And you mentioned becoming friends with vulnerability. So if you say
Yes.
a little bit more about vulnerability, which I know is a massive thing that Brene Brown talks about, and I know
Mhm.
you're accredited to work with Brene
Yes.
Brown's work, so awesome.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, yeah, I am a certified Dare to Lead facilitator with Brené Brown's work. I've been working with her work since I think 2015-ish, with Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and now with Dare to Lead. And at the core of her work is vulnerability. And vulnerability is just really not a very nice sensation. It's that feeling of risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. So you make a piece of jewelry and you show it to someone for the first time. That might be something that feels vulnerable because you're facing risk, you don't know how they're going to react, you're facing the uncertainty and the emotional exposure of, they might say, well, that's a bit rubbish, or, oh, did you mean to make it like that, or is it meant to be that wonky? And so that vulnerability that we have when we're making and sharing something creative, or when we're talking to someone about how we feel, or when we're putting something new out into the world. The problem with vulnerability is we don't want people to see it in us. We want to see it in other people because it makes us feel connected with them. And so we try and cover it up. And, maybe we make a piece of jewelry, but we don't show anybody just in case they kind of say something that we don't want to hear. Um, and yet, when we're thinking about change, you have to become friends with vulnerability. You have to start to dip your toe into sharing things, you know, talking about the things that you might want to have create, or talking about the change you might want to create in your own life, knowing that it's never going to feel comfortable. It's always going to suck. It's always going to feel uncomfortable, and it creates connection. It creates connection and it makes things become possible. I often say I talk things into reality. I mean, yes, I wrote a book and I had to actually sit down and write the book, but I talked about it for a long time before I actually did it. The same with the business. I spent the first year talking about it before I even had any clients. And so the more we can start to become friends with vulnerability, we can start to create a little pathway for ourselves into the future. And it doesn't have to be sharing everything with everyone. In fact, it's not a good idea to share everything with everyone. So this isn't about, putting all of your ideas on social media or telling even your closest friends everything. It's about small steps. Again, it's that, like the Martha Beckett's the turtle steps. It's the building of small bridges. So maybe telling one person about one thought you've got about something you might do, and just noticing that that feels exposed, and noticing that that's okay, even though it doesn't feel like it. And you want to go, no, 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 actually, it doesn't matter. It's fine. It's not a big thing, or, all those diminishing things that we do, but just to stay with it, because that's what creates the courage. The two go hand in hand.
Mm. Yes, because that's the second one I was going to talk to you about, as the discover your courage. And I think it's so true that if we're just waiting to find the courage, it doesn't work that way round. Yeah. We
No,
have
it's on the
to
other
be,
side.
it works the other way. We have to kind of go in vulnerable. We have to go in feeling
Yeah.
that fear,
Yeah.
because it doesn't go unless the only way it goes is when we do something, isn't it?
Exactly. The courage is waiting on the other side. If you're waiting until you feel brave enough to do something, you're going to be waiting for a very long time. You have to do the thing and then you'll feel brave enough after the fact. And I have a lion on my desk who reminds me to be brave. So, you know, even though I do this work all the time, I still need the little reminders and the little cues. And that was from when I launched the book out into the world. But even as I grow my business, and you know this because you've been doing this kind of work for quite some time as well, that I think people think that somehow it's comfortable, and that when people are successful in the world, that they don't face that fear and they don't have to be brave and they don't have to be courageous. And the reality couldn't be further from the truth. Anyone who's doing anything big and bold in the world, or even small and bold in the world, has to keep taking the steps and be brave and be courageous in order to keep moving forward. And I know because I'm constantly challenging myself, got big, big work projects that we're releasing out into the world this year. And I'm terrified most of the time. And all I do is I just have to go, okay, I know I'm terrified. I just got to be brave. I've just got to keep going because my purpose is so clear. And that's one of the other change skills, is when you know your reason why, that gives you the galvanizing power to be able to keep going. When you don't really know why you're doing something or what's important about it to you, then it's really hard, because then you don't have that force pulling you forward. So knowing what your purpose is, maybe your purpose is to make something that brings beauty into the world. Maybe your purpose is to be an experimenter who pushes the boundaries of what's possible with a material. Maybe it's about, bringing the gift of um, beauty to people that wouldn't otherwise access it. Whatever your purpose is, that then gives you the rocket fuel to be courageous and to keep taking those steps. You're never going to feel totally confident about it. I genuinely don't believe anyone who says they are, because it undermines human psychology to pretend that we just don't care and we're all fine about putting ourselves out there all the time. Reality is we crave connection. So anything that risks disconnection is going to make us want to go, maybe not today.
I agree with that. I feel like every time we're kind of moving up and up leveling a little bit and doing something new in our life, we're always going to come up against these things.
Yeah.
It's like you
Yeah.
say, it's just human nature. It's natural. I love the lion. I might have to get myself a little lion as well.
Other furry creatures are available, but the
Other
lion is
very,
quite helpful.
very furry creatures are available. Yes,
Yeah.
whatever that means for you. I
Mm.
think actually it can help to have symbols like that around you. Some people it might be words or a quote or something, but I
Yeah.
think it can be a helpful thing to have. So as a sideboard.
Absolutely. I mean, it's definitely something that I recommend to everyone is, whether it's something that reminds you of your purpose or that helps you to be compassionate to yourself, then having those reminders. Some people are visual, so help having it physically around them helps. Some people are more auditory, so maybe change your ringtone on your phone or have a playlist that you listen to when you're doing something scary. And some people are more kind of tactile and need something that they can hold on to or touch on to. So
Mm,
know what works for you. And again, you don't have to know to begin with. Test it out and see what happens.
yeah. Or make yourself a little piece of jewelry that gives you some,
Yeah,
you
100%. A
know.
talisman, definitely.
I love talismans. Yeah,
Yeah,
I love that idea.
engraving things.
Fabulous. So we've looked at becoming friends with vulnerability and
Mm,
discovering our courage and
yeah.
finding our purpose.
Hmm.
So the next one I have on my, well, your list, on the list is honoring your values. Can you say a little bit
Yes.
more about what that all means?
Yeah, so it's funny because I've just been writing some of our online learning material about values. So it's kind of uppermost in my mind this week, actually.
Very
Um,
good.
core, sometimes people have done a lot of work on identifying their core values and they know what they are, and other times they haven't. But it's those kind of guiding, kind of either compass points or kind of guiding stars that really drive your decision making and that give you something to keep coming back to. And they don't change throughout your life. You can have a number of different values. I kind of describe it sometimes as being a little bit like a rainbow. So, in a rainbow, when you look at it, sometimes some of the colors are really prominent and sometimes some of them fade back a little bit, but all the colors are there. Your core values are always there throughout your life. Now, yes, maybe one or two of them might stand out more prominently at some points and others may fade to the background, but the overall core values don't change. So they really are the things that guide you and drive you through your life. And for me, my two core values are courage and authenticity. And honestly, Anna, I sometimes wish they weren't because my life would be a lot more quiet and peaceful, and I'd probably be sitting watching the telly and quite happily chilling out. Whereas reality is, courage and authenticity means as soon as I feel like I'm not being completely myself, or I feel like I'm holding back because I'm scared of something, my values start to kind of crunch and grate in the background. And I go, oh no, I'm going to have to do that thing because it's that sense of discomfort. So if someone has a value of community and they're spending a lot of their time doing more isolated things, they're going to start to feel that crunch. Equally, if they're completely immersed in community, then they're going to feel more fulfilled and more rewarded. So knowing that in your jewelry work can be hugely powerful, whether it's hobby jewelry or whether in it for more business reasons, because it will help and influence your decision making. If you are somebody who's got a really strong value of independence and doing things your way, knowing that will help you make different choices. It'll help you engage in jewelry making differently than if you didn't have that awareness. So it definitely helps to keep aligned with them, for sure.
And I think it comes back to that. We're talking a little bit more about all through this around kind of authenticity and being
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when we have those fears, it's almost like that's almost blocking ourselves from coming through.
Yeah.
And those values are such an important part of ourself and who we are. But also, I think with business now, let's just talk particularly
Mm.
about handmade business and things. I think people are genuinely attracted to authenticity. If somebody is
Mm.
particularly interested in recycling metals or
Mm.
reusing or sort of gemstones or just inspired by the sea. I don't know, whatever
Yeah.
it is that we're inspired by, having those values and why we're inspired by them and sharing a little bit about that. it's
Yeah,
it's another
completely.
point of connection, isn't it?
Completely. I mean, as I was mentioning to you before we started recording today, I was at Pot Fest on Saturday with my sister and meeting all these different ceramic artists and people who work with clay as a material. And the thing that came through repeatedly was the passion that people had. And in fact, I bought absolutely phenomenal ceramic dragon. Who is just the best dragon I've ever seen. But one of the first things that the artist who created this dragon said was, this is a technique you're not meant to be able to do on sculpture, but nobody told me, so I did it. um, and actually, that sense of freedom and possibility that can come from when we have a purpose and we're aligned with our core values, and then we have the courage to kind of follow that and not feel like we have to conform or we have to, be like somebody else or be like something else. And to have again that courage to keep following our own path is so vital because that's how things get created. That's the absolute essence of creativity.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's so true. That's so
Mm.
true. And then we have 2 more, which maybe sound similar, but it's
Mm.
self-care and self-compassion.
Yes.
So, if we start with practicing self-care, what does that mean? What could somebody do?
Yeah. I mean, I'll talk about that. I will talk about them as a bit of a double act because people do often get them confused. And also because self care in particular, I think, people think if you look up self care on, Instagram or Facebook or whatever, then you'll get all kinds of different things. And the reality is, a lot of them aren't actually true self care. So, and I'm sorry to break it to anyone listening, but self care isn't actually just buying yourself flowers. It's nice to buy yourself flowers if you like flowers, but self care is actually about how are you looking after yourself and doing the things that nobody else can do for you? How are you making sure that you really are getting enough rest? How are you making sure that you are holding boundaries? If you're saying that you want to do more jewelry making, are you really protecting the time for that? Or are you letting it get squashed by other things because, the children need something or, you need to stay late doing work or something else? And it's not something I find easy, right? I struggle with this too, particularly when it comes to creative hobby pursuits, which is why you and I keep meeting at silver clay classes because it's the only way I prioritize the time. But actually having that ability to care for ourselves, to say no, to honor the commitments that we make to ourselves, absolutely vital, particularly when we're facing change. Because as we talked about earlier, facing change brings uncertainty and can bring that destabilization piece. So, actually, how do you look after yourself through that? And it is with some of those core behaviors rather than, you know, having a manicure as much as I like nice nails. That's kind of what I would call relatively superficial self-care. The deeper stuff is the harder stuff. Um, Self-compassion kind of sits alongside it, but it's actually about how do you talk to yourself in your own head. Most people are pretty mean and horrible to themselves in their own head. In fact, if we had speech bubbles that people could see, they'd be horrified by some of the things we say to ourselves. Um, and again, when we're facing change or we're being creative or pushing the boundaries, that self voice can be super critical, super harsh, and say things we would never say to anybody else. I mean, if if I was to come up and show you a piece of jewelry that I had made, you would never say some of the things about it that I would say about it. Oh, this is rubbish. And we've sat in kind of workshop type scenarios, and I've heard people say things that are really very shocking. So self compassion is about talking to yourself in your own head the way you would talk to anybody else. And for me, it helps to think of it as two radio stations. I have Demanding FM, and that's not a great radio station. And I have Compassion FM. And Compassion FM doesn't just give me a walk in the park all the time, isn't going to go, oh, yes, you did a great job, even though I'm looking at something that's a bit pants, right? It's actually about saying, well, you experimented with a new technique here. Isn't it great that you've pushed the boundaries in that way? What would it take to do it in a way that, created an outcome that you were more happy with visually? That's like balanced self-compassion rather than just going, it's all fluffy and roses and fine when, actually you've just crashed the car. I mean, that was a stupid thing to do potentially. It doesn't make you a complete and utter idiot, a failure and a disaster who should live under a rock for the rest of your life, because that's not realistic and it's not compassionate. And for anyone who wants to find out a lot more about self-compassion, then there's a bit about Kristen Neff in Untangled as well, about her work in terms of how to be more self-compassionate. And it makes a huge difference. It makes life less exhausting, Anna, is the honest truth, because it's exhausting to keep beating yourself up in your own head all the time. And actually, when we can tap into self-compassion, then things become a little smoother.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. That's so true. And I think all of these change skills together, they I don't know, they seem like big things and also small things, if you see what I mean. They
Yeah.
seem like the
Mm.
big things in life,
Yeah.
but they also feel like the things, that we should probably have and we may not have. I
Yeah.
think again, we shouldn't judge ourselves if we're not quite sure what are those values. What do I feel? Oh, do I beat myself up in my head? I think
Yeah.
it's the first step is just that noticing it, isn't it? And
Exactly.
challenging.
Yeah. And again, it is about even starting from that sense of self-compassion of, oh wow, okay, I listened to a podcast episode recently which is about sleep, by the lady whose name I've forgotten now, but who set up Neon, the fragrance wellbeing brand. And I was like, it's tempting to listen to something like that and go, oh my goodness, my sleep patterns are terrible. Where do I even start? But it is starting in the small steps. If you are facing change, whether it's the change that you're choosing in your life or it's change that you're not, you can use it as an opportunity to go, oh, what if I tried it this way? Or what if I tried this one little piece? Pick one of the things. I mean, we've kind of covered so much ground today, but pick one piece that maybe a little bit of you is curious about and wants to test out a bit and see what happens. What would happen if I just had a little bit more self-compassion? Or what if I started to notice, even just notice, where am I scared about something? And actually just notice it. You don't even have to do anything about it to start with. Just go, oh, I'm scared of something. Well, that's interesting. You know, like me on Friday on the way into the freezer, noticing that thought pattern of, I'm convinced I'm gonna die. I'm gonna have a heart attack, and then going, "Oh, well, what if that wasn't true? And actually, I'm still here, so it didn't kill me."
I think that's such an important thing is I love this quote of we are not our thoughts, we're the thinker of our thoughts, and this
Yeah.
idea that of stepping away from our thoughts, because sometimes we can cling on to them
Yeah.
so strongly, but
Yeah.
actually if we can take that step back and kind of watch those thoughts.
Yeah.
I think Glennon Doyle talks about them as can you see it as weather, and it's just
Yes.
passing through.
Yeah, exactly. We don't get
It's
to
like
obsess and fixate on the storm. We just go, "Oh, it's gonna pass. It's gonna be here, and then it's gonna be gone, and it'll be something else." And detaching fact from fiction is vital. That's so, so important. Have we messed it up, or actually have we just discovered a way that that thing didn't work? Yeah, I mean, that's Edison and the light bulb all over. So,
absolutely true.
mm.
Thank you so much for your time today, Kirsty. Really lovely to catch up with you again. Where can people find out about you? Where can they follow you? Can you share some of your links and things?
Yes. So the place I am most chatty is on Instagram, Kirsty Maynor, KirstyMaynor. And you can also sign up at kirstymaynor.com for my email, which at the moment is monthly. It was weekly, but it's gone back to monthly. And that's more pondering, musing, and pontificating about life and change, and the place to find out about any cool stuff and exciting stuff in the future.
And certainly check out your book, Untangled.
Yeah. Yeah.
If this has been an interesting conversation for you and you're here at the end of it, then I would definitely suggest going and buying that book. And
Yeah.
also there's the journal as well, isn't there?
Yeah, so there's Untangled the book, and then there's the companion journal. Some people might want to do the audiobook and then use the journal to write their thoughts, or ebook and use the journal, or just have the book and a regular notebook. And both are available anywhere that you buy good books in the UK and internationally. So you should be able to get your hands on it quite easily.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Kirsty. Lovely to see you. I'll see you on another class again soon, hopefully.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hannah. Take care.
Okay.